Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear from the former town clerk of Kensington and Chelsea, Mr. Holgate.
Yes,
Mr. Millett.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, good morning. Good morning, members of the panel. I now call Mr. Nicholas Holgate, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Holgate.
Morning.
I understand you're going to take the oath.
Yes.
There should be a testament there. You've got it. Good. Could you hold in your right hand and read the words on the screen, please?
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. And please sit down and make yourself comfortable. Right. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Yes. Mr. Holgate, first of all, good morning to you.
Morning.
And can I start by thanking you very much for coming to the inquiry and assisting us with our investigations. We're very grateful to you. During the course of your evidence, a number of things. First, if I ask a question that you can't hear or don't understand or want me to rephrase, I can do that. Second, could I please ask you to keep your voice up so that the person who sits to your immediate right and is typing can get down your evidence clearly? Don't nod or shake your head. You have to say yes or no, as the case may be. We'll take breaks during the course of the morning and the afternoon, but if you need a break at any other time, we can take a break. All right? Now, you've made a number of statements to the inquiry, two of which relate to the aftermath of the fire. And everything that we're going to be examining together will appear on the screen on your desk in front of you. Can I show you first two statements? You've given us your first aftermath witness statement to the inquiry at RBK 3035426. That's dated the 27th of September. At the foot of it, at page 10, if we can go there, please. And there's a signature. Is that your signature?
It is.
Thank you. And the second aftermath statement is at RBK 3036176. That's dated the 21st of January 2021. And if we could go, please, to page 7, you can see a signature there. Yes?
Yes.
Can you please confirm that's your signature as well?
It is.
Have you read both of these statements recently?
I have.
And can you confirm, please, that their contents are true?
I think there is one error in the first statement, which is that recently, I think while looking at other material, I gathered that there was actually a form in the contingency plan for invoking London Gold. And I think in my first statement, I say that, as it were, a conversation is enough. So I think I got that wrong.
Right. Now, let's turn to your background and qualifications and look at your first aftermath statement, and let's take this as quickly as we can. Page 2, paragraph 6, where you touch briefly on your work experience, and summarising it, is it right that you worked in central government, first employed by HM Treasury in 1984 as a management accountant, and you held that role for some 20 years?
I held a number of roles within the civil service for, I think, 24 years. Yeah.
24 years, right. And from 2004 to 2008, you held the role of Chief Operating Officer.
Sorry, I was embracing the two. Yeah.
Right, fine. But 2004 to 2008, you held the role of Chief Operating Officer at the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, I think, didn't you?
Correct.
Yes. And in 2008, you joined RBKC as Executive Director for Finance, Information Systems and Property. That's paragraph 6.
Yes.
Yes. And then in 2013, you became the Interim Chief Executive alongside your role as Finance Director. Is that right?
Yes.
And then in December 2014, that position became permanent and you became known as the Town Clerk.
Yes.
Yes. And was that linked together with your role as Finance Director?
It was until April 2017.
Now, paragraph 5 of your statement on page...
sorry, just wait.
Go to that.
I don't know who's got
There's a noise.
something broadcasting on. Anyway,
Well,
can we all make sure we've got our phones and anything that might make a noise switched off, please? Thank you very much. Yes, on you go, Mr.
Thank you. Page 1, paragraph 5, and then over to the page on page 2. You set out the role that you occupied as Town Clerk. And just taking that as in summary, it's right, I think, that you were responsible for the overall stewardship and good governance of the borough to ensure the high quality of services, yes?
Correct.
And that included the management of senior staff?
Correct.
And I think you were responsible to, that is, answerable to the leader of the council, who was at that stage Nicholas Paget-Brown.
That's right.
And also his cabinet, yes?
That's right.
Did you report to him directly?
I did.
Right. And in addition to the town clerk role, it's right, I think, that from December 2014, you also continued to hold the role of finance director, as you say, until April 2017. What happened to that role in April 2017?
It was awarded to Kevin Bartle, who
Right.
had been working at the council for a little while before then.
I see. Did you have a handover with him?
Well, he had been performing many of the duties and had been a finance director at, I think, at least one other London borough, so he was well appraised of the duties.
Right. And as you tell us later in your statement at paragraph 51 on page 10, you resigned your role as town clerk on the 21st of June 2017.
Correct.
Yes. So 7 days after the fire.
Correct.
And therefore you would hold, is this right, the sole position of town clerk, or that is to say town clerk only, for some 3 months?
Yes.
Yes. Did you find that having the dual role of town clerk and finance director up till April 2017 adversely affected your ability in any way to establish yourself as and to carry out your role as town clerk?
I did not think that it did, but of course I could be wrong about that.
Right. Now, for the purposes of the civil contingencies framework, to which I wish to turn now, is it right that, first, a local authority is a Category 1 responder?
Yes.
And you understood that at the time?
Yes.
Yes. And in simple terms, did you understand that Category 1 responders are those organisations at the core of emergency service response, which would include the emergency services, local authorities and NHS bodies?
Yes.
And as such, Category 1 responders have a number of legal duties and responsibilities, including maintaining plans to ensure the ability to perform their functions in an emergency.
Yes.
Yes. Now, we've heard that the contingency management plan for RBKC was drafted by, and as it were, owned by David Kerry, the RBKC contingency planning manager. Yes?
Yes.
And you understood that the current version at the time of the Grenfell Tower fire was the one dated 30th of April 2015. Yes?
I wouldn't know off the top of my head which was the current version,
Right.
but they did bear close resemblances to one another.
Right. And do you agree that that was an important document which set out how RBKC should respond in the event of an emergency to which it applied?
I do agree.
Yes. And looking at your own role in an emergency, paragraph 8 of your first statement, paragraph 8 of your first statement, if we go to page 2, let's just
Yes.
pick that up. You tell us that as town clerk, you would be Borough Gold as part of the council's contingency management plan.
That's
Yes?
correct.
And that's also known as Council Gold.
Yes,
We've seen references to it as Council Gold, and you understood that expression.
indeed.
Now, if we go to the contingency management plan itself, we find that at RBK 302861. Let's look at the first page. There it is, 30th of April 2015. Just looking at the first page of this, and it's a giant document with lots of bits, but was this a document with which you were familiar?
I was familiar. I had a copy of certainly the main part of it at home. I reread it each time a new issue. I was conscious of a new issue.
You say you had a copy of it, the main part at home, so was it
Yep.
as a hard copy on your...
Indeed,
on
and a hard
shelf?
copy, and in the office, of course.
Right. And if you go to page 39 in the document, please, we can see the part. We can see part 5.2, roles and responsibilities summary, and the functions of Council Gold are there set out. You can see them in the first.
Yes.
Certainly in the first box, and there are 4 bullet points there.
Yep.
Determine the Council's strategic course of action, lead the strategic coordinating group, liaison with leader and other members, attend or be represented at multi-agency strategic coordinating group meetings. Now, at the time of the fire, did you understand those to be your responsibilities as Council Gold?
Yes.
You did. Let's then turn to the next topic, training and capacity. Is it the position that before the events of the 14th of June 2017, you had no experience yourself of acting as Council Gold in a major emergency?
That's true.
and I think you tell us that at paragraph 14 on page 3. Were you aware at that time that in relation to emergency or contingency plans, RBKC as a Category 1 responder was under a regulatory duty to carry out training and exercises for the purposes of ensuring that those plans were effective?
I'm not sure that I would have known that it was a regulatory duty, but I would certainly have accepted that it was very good and recommended practice to do so.
Right. Dealing with your own training then first, as at June 2017, what would you say, how would you assess or describe the sufficiency of training that you had undertaken to act as Council Gold in the event of an emergency? Was it sufficient or was it insufficient?
Well, I would say it was insufficient, with the benefit of hindsight, plainly insufficient. I can explain what I had done, but I think the direct answer to your question is that it was plainly insufficient.
Now, let's just look at what you'd done. I think in the opening statement put in by RBKC to this module of this inquiry, the Council says that you had received some training, but acknowledged that, quotes, it was not of itself sufficient for the role of Council Gold, and I think you have agreed with that. But it doesn't represent the totality of the training that you had received. Well, perhaps we can take this more shortly. Could you tell us what training you had received yourself to act as Council Gold?
Certainly. There is a very modest induction process that my understanding was that all London Borough Chief Executives, or nearly all of them, went through as part of being on a rota to be London Gold should there be a call for a London Gold operation. And that would only have been a few hours at most. It essentially involved a visit to a facility which might have hosted a London-wide operation were one to be needed and were there to be a local authority chief executive in a gold role. In addition to that, as you know, we did have a practice in 2015. I attended as an observer one day of the Unified Response exercise, which was, I think, quite an impressive London-wide attempt to rehearse for a major disaster. And it is just worth recalling that in terms of large disasters, I think the one that animated colleagues and I most over that period was the risk of terrorism. So I think the Bataclan massacre in Paris had been the previous year. And the most cohesive thing I had attended before the fire was a conference on lessons to be learned from that terrible series of events. And indeed, if you looked through my mailbox with a fine enough tooth comb, you would find a couple of things that I was pursuing coming out of that conference.
And can you remember what those things were?
I can, but to be brutally honest, I'd rather not talk about them because I don't know whether the council completed one or both. And one of them would be about preventing a tragedy. Another one would have been about mitigating it.
In the context of terrorism?
Yes.
I see. So are you alluding to a potential national security issue?
Yes, it would have been a national issue if such a thing had occurred that I was doing work in a very small way to try and make less likely.
I follow. Well, we may come back to the detail of what you've just told us in a moment.
Sure.
Before we do, let me just examine Mr. Kerry's evidence about training. We heard from him in his statement that before June 2017, the date of the most recent Gold Group training on strategic command, control and recovery was the 14th of September 2015, so some 21 months before the fire. Is that right?
I think that is right.
And that was a 2-hour tabletop discussion or desktop exercise, yes?
Correct.
And in relation to the duration of that training, Mr. Kerry's evidence was that it wasn't sufficient. He'd asked for a 4-hour slot. This is at day 268, page 78, lines 2 to 8. And then he says, at first told that he couldn't do it, no need to do it, and he was given 2 hours, and then he told us that at the end of the session, as he left, you told him next time you need longer.
Yes.
Do you recall that?
Well, I don't recall it, but it may save time to say that I cannot offhand think of anything that any of the RBKC witnesses have said to you over the last few days with which I would take any issue at all. So if David Kerry said that, then I said it. The gloss I would put on it is that I was not sure what value this sort of exercise would be,
right.
But after 2 hours, I was persuaded that such training was worthwhile.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Now, just to be clear, in light of that last answer, can we be confident that you have followed the RBKC witnesses' evidence?
I followed anything that has any reference to me in it.
Right. Okay. Then I think I understand the parameters of your answer.
Thank you.
Was it the position that senior management were not prepared to make the time available and commit to contingency management training, or was there some other problem?
I think that you're right to say that there was sometimes resistance to setting aside significant time for such training. I think it is worth pointing out, and I'll try to do this only once, but it's a very important background fact, that from 2010 onwards, there were very large reductions in the recurrent funding of local authorities. From my other statement, I think the figure for the borough by the time of 2017 was of the order of 28%. And despite such a reduction, it was our very great determination to keep all the normal services of the borough going as well as possible, if not actually to improve upon their quality, because that was the demand, the rightful demand, both of residents and of councillors. So I was not completely unsympathetic to, I understood the pressures that senior managers across the council were under.
To what extent, in light of that answer, was there a consideration given to how to comply with the fixed statutory obligations under the Civil Contingencies Act and its regulations and the statutory guidance on the one hand, whilst allowing for these budget exigencies on the other?
I can't remember an explicit discussion of the tension between those two things.
Do you remember, and this is a more general question, do you remember any discussion at London-wide level within the LRP or the LRF or other bodies sitting within the London or pan-London resilient structure about whether some boroughs were doing better than others in relation to being able to fund their civil contingencies obligations?
I don't recall being party to any such discussion in those fora. I do not think in the case of the Royal Borough funding was an insurmountable issue. It was the lack of funding for all the valuable services that we performed day after day, which led to a shortage of time and great pressure on senior managers that I was alluding to. The pan-London body that I did attend fairly diligently were meetings of the chief executives of most of the boroughs that took place every 5 or 6 weeks, I would think. There were occasionally items there, so for instance, the conference on terrorism that I've referred to, or feedback from or plans for the unified response exercise. But again, I do not recall any discussion in that forum of the kind that you're mentioning.
Now let's go back to the contingency management plan. RBK 30 is 28631, page 11, paragraph 1.8, please. And you can see there the heading, training and exercising at the top. Was it the case? Well, let me read it to you. It says, this contingency management plan shall be exercised at least once annually. The exercise shall test and validate the activation of the plan, the operation of the Borough Emergency Control Centres, BEC, the links between the BECs and the council services. Now, with respect to exercising the contingency management plan, I think you would agree that RBKC wasn't exercising it annually.
I would agree.
And so you would agree not complying with what was set out in its own plan?
I would agree.
And looking at the next passage in 1.8, training shall be offered in each year for staff with designated emergency response roles and shall take the form of specific training sessions, seminars and talks and workshops. In relation to training for staff with designated emergency response roles, such as Council Gold, do you accept that that was less frequent than each year?
Yes.
Why was that?
I don't think there's a good reason for that lack. I think that we did have occasional emergencies, so some part of the emergency provision was tested in reality, but it did not directly involve my unavoidable participation as Council Gold.
Now, were you aware, as David Kerry has told us, that for the role of Council Silver, in other words, those who were to lead the operational response, there was no formal training programme at any time before the Grenfell Tower fire?
I wasn't aware of that. What I would have said is that I set some store by David's considerable experience and I think evident expertise in the matter, and I would have thought that he would have been offering training to an adequate level, and I think he did take part in such things, but I wouldn't be able to tell you the quantum or the sufficiency of it.
Let's then turn back to the topic of training on local London Authority Gold and London Resilience.
Yep.
You refer in your statements to LLAG, London Local Authority Gold. Is it the position, just in general terms, that that is a pan-London mechanism which can be activated in response to an emergency, drawing on the resources of all 33 local authorities led by a single chief executive?
Correct.
Yes. And those arrangements, again, I think this is correct and common ground, are underpinned by something called a Gold Resolution, yes?
Yes.
Which was, I think, a document passed in 2011. Were you familiar with that?
I've certainly read it, yeah.
It was passed on behalf of each London Borough Council and the City of London. Now, you mentioned in your statement that you were inducted into the role of London Local Authority Gold. This is at paragraphs 47 and 48 of your statement. There's no need to go to it. We can take it quickly. But that was as part of your role as Town Clerk, was it?
Yeah, it was me taking my place in that rota, yes, correct.
Right. Do you remember when you were inducted into that role?
Not precisely, no. I think I would have thought it would have been 2014 or 2015.
Right. Now, let's go to RBK 3036752. What I'm showing you is an email chain in June 2017, before the fire. And if we go to page 2, please, foot of that page, and go over to page 3, this is an email between your PA, Sally Spriggs, and David Munro. Yes?
Yep.
And David Munro is, as is said clearly there, is a London Resilience Support Officer. It's an email from him to you, inviting you, I think, to a strategic response training session for chief executives on the 20th of June.
That might well have been what I was referring to. Yeah.
Now, had you had that type of training before June 2017?
I think so, yes.
When was that?
Well, I don't remember. It would have been in my diary, and I would have attended it with Tony Redpath at the facility in just over from Lambeth Bridge that would have been activated for a London-wide emergency.
Right. Now, if we go back to page 2, please, we can see the response from your PA, Sally Spriggs, back to David Munro, second half of the page, and she says, this is 5th of June 2017, she says, David, under the event prerequisites, it refers to a number of documentation that delegates should familiarise themselves with. Nicholas wants to have a look at these, but I don't have access to either of the sites mentioned. Are you able to send me the documents or send me a link so I can print these off? And the materials were listed at the top of the thread. And take this from me, they were, well, we can go to the top of the thread if you like. If we go, please, to the top of page 1, we can see what they were. Second email down, she specifies them. and they are the London Local Authority Gold, LAAG arrangements and the Gold Resolution, and then Strategic Coordination Protocol, London Resilience Partnership Plan summaries, London Recovery Management Protocol, and the Humanitarian Assistance Framework. Those are the documents. Had you seen any of those materials before?
I think I had, yes.
Were you familiar? Sorry.
So certainly the first one, probably the second one. I'm not sure about the others.
Did you have them to hand?
I doubt I would have done.
Right. Can you explain why you hadn't seen the ones you hadn't seen before?
I don't think I've got a particular reason why I wouldn't have seen them. I don't recall anyone alerting me to the need to look at them.
Right. Do you know how your PA was aware of what documents specifically to ask for?
No.
Did you ask her to seek out this list?
I'd be very surprised if I'd been able to compile that list.
Right. So she must have got it from somewhere.
Yes.
Do you know where?
Well, probably from Mr. Munro, if he knew the composition.
Now you can see from this email that David Kerry is the person, is the addressee of this email.
Yeah.
You can't tell us whether there was a conversation between them or where she got that information from.
No.
No. Now, our records, or inquiry records, show, and particularly Mr. Sawyer's witness statement at GOL 401349, paragraph 14, we don't need to go to it, that you were on call on a number of dates in 2016, both as primary and as secondary London Local Authority Gold. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Were you actually called on when you were on call?
I don't believe so, no.
Right. How could you be on call to act as London Local Authority Gold without knowing what the arrangements were and without being familiar with the Resilience Partnership Plan summaries and the other documents you hadn't seen?
Sure. Well, that implies that at an earlier date I would have read these documents. It is quite possible that I would have done. All that I can remember of the training is the visit to the location from which we might have had to run a London Gold operation. So, I mean, I think I've confused myself slightly. I hadn't realised the dates on these emails. I mean, these emails are obviously, just before the fire. The London Gold induction that I had was some time before that, as I said in response to one of your earlier questions. And if that training had embraced these documents, then I would have read those documents at that time. But they do not, as it were, I would not be able to tell you the content of those documents now.
No. So, sorry, so just to be clear, at the times when you were on call as LLAG, you were familiar with or had access to the last 3 documents in that 5-document list, but not at the time of the proposed training in 2017. Is
correct. That seems to me the most likely thing, but it would be checkable somewhere in the exchanges of email, particularly around the time that I did the induction. There should have been some evidence of these documents being sent over.
Right.
I mean, the danger is if they're bulky, they would have been sent in hard copy, and therefore there wouldn't be an email trail necessarily.
Right. But can we leave it this way, that at the time of the fire, although you may or may not have had a previous historical familiarity with them in your role as London Gold, they weren't imprinted on your brain or sitting on your shelf?
Correct.
Yes, I see. Now, looking back on the internal and external training that you received yourself, do you consider now that you were suitably equipped to deal with an emergency of the scale of the Grenfell Tower fire?
Undoubtedly not.
And in which particular ways do you consider yourself ill-equipped?
I think that it is possible that in the several years in which I served as a chief executive, I picked up the notion that the chief executive in many cases was very dependent upon the staff that were steeped in training. I think I'd also picked up some belief or some view that because there were a great variety of crises that could hit, actually preparing in depth for each and every one of them was more than boroughs could cope with. And of course, the wrong conclusion to draw from that is that one had to put up with being a generalist who would suddenly be confronted with a very specific disaster. And I think that that was the quandary that certainly I felt we were in, and maybe others would have felt that similarly.
Right. Can I just see if I can understand that answer? Was the problem that because of the infinite variety of kinds of major disaster that could befall London and befall RBKC in particular, you had no choice, or you felt at the time, to be anything more than a generalist? Is that what you're saying?
That's pretty much it,
right,
yes. Yeah.
Now let's then turn to the question of capacity. As at June 2017, had you yourself undertaken any kind of assessment to satisfy yourself as Chief Executive that RBKC, as a Category 1 responder, had sufficient trained staff to undertake specialist roles in an emergency, such as Council Silvers and officers to operate the BEC?
No.
Why not?
Because I would have hoped that people who were more in touch with the specific needs would have alerted me if we were in deficit.
So, reliance on negative reporting?
I think that if I'd formed a view that that function was poorly staffed, or that the people there lacked expertise or professional skills, then I would have been much more on alert. But I actually thought that the council was quite blessed with the staff that we had. The core team had not suffered reductions in the spending pressures that had befallen a lot of other parts of the council. And I felt confident that if there were shortcomings, I was creating a culture, a management culture in the council where people would feel able to say and put me on alert. And indeed, if I may make one other point, in successive funding rounds each year, the Cabinet Member for Finance and I were very anxious to find areas where the general pressure relentlessly to make economies had to be overcome in the opposite direction if there was something that we really couldn't economise on any further.
Was it not the position that as at June 2017, you knew there was an insufficient number of trained staff to deal with a contingency?
I think the history is that David Kerry had rightly warned me that we had too few. We had attempted to recruit some more, and the numbers had gone up, but then they had come down again. And I cannot remember whether I knew the last bit or not, but I would expect there to be email evidence to that effect.
Well, you told us in your last answer that the core team had not suffered reductions because of spending pressures, and you felt confident that if there were shortcomings, you had a culture where you could be alerted. My question is, had you not been alerted to the fact that there were shortcomings in staff capacity in order to address a contingency?
I think that there's a distinction in my mind which doesn't sort of satisfy the question, but there's a distinction in my mind between people paid full-time to fulfil full-time or a very large part of their time in emergency planning role, and then others who forewent their normal duties and became part of the emergency planning team if required. So I'm referring to the former group that I don't think suffered reductions. The latter group I know had fluctuated in number, and I certainly accept that by the time of the fire there were too few of them.
Right, thank you. Well, let's just take the documents quickly and see what you can recall. Do you remember that the problem about staffing was raised with you as long before the fire as October 2014 in a report written by David, or prepared by David Kerry, entitled Emergency Staff Recruitment and Retention?
That's right, and
yes.
that's what I remember responding to and trying to encourage more people to volunteer.
Right, let's just put that up so that everybody can see what we're discussing. RBK 3058038. There's the report, 8th of October 2014. In the box for decision, the council has insufficient trained volunteers for major incident emergency management roles in the Borough Emergency Control Centre. Support from executive directors is sought. And then at page 1, lower down, paragraph 1.2, it says there is now a significant shortfall in the numbers of trained volunteer emergency management staff required. Traditional recruitment methods no longer generate new volunteers. Demands from the day job are curtailing attendance at required training sessions and emergency exercises. Support is now sought from executive directors. And I'm assuming you saw that at the time.
I think so, yeah.
What did you do about it?
Well, I supported attempts to recruit more volunteers.
Right, and did those succeed?
I think they did temporarily, and then the numbers fell away again.
Right, and we come then to January 2016. Do you remember at that stage David Kerry expressing concerns to you about the numbers of staff in the role of Borough Silver and incident response officers?
I wouldn't remember it off the top of my head, but if David told me so, then that must be the case.
Right. Let's look at RBK 3058008. This is an email chain in January 2016 where he raises this particular problem with you. If we go to page 5 in the chain, we pick it up at the foot of 4. In the usual time-honoured way, the email has become separated from its heading at the bottom of the page. This is from you to David Kerry, copy to Tony Redpath, 19th January 2016, over the top of page 5. David, a colleague at my brown bag lunch today suggested that there had been a decline in staff willing to form a part of a crisis support team from across the council. Is this recognisable as a concern and correct? If so, what should we do about it? Now, just pausing there, you were posed this question. Was the decline in staff, as it were, the rise and then the fall, is that something that happened between October 2014 and the first report from David Kerry we've just seen, and January 2016, so 14 months?
I would think so.
Right. And then if we turn over, please, to page 2, we can see David Kerry's response, at the foot of page 2, to you.
Yep.
Nicholas, crisis support team, yes, this is a current concern. The crisis support team is a group of volunteers from across the council who have been trained to provide emotional support to people affected by a major emergency or incident in the borough. They will normally be deployed in the first hours of an emergency, most likely to a survivor reception centre or a friends and relatives reception centre. The team will normally work with people over 18 years old. And then on page 3, his response refers to the Beck staff and the 2 roles that he says are of concern. And you could see the heading. 1, Beck, Borough Emergency Controller, the Tactical Commander, Silver, and he sets out the figures there. Ideally, 10 senior managers, and then Beck officers, and over the page to page 4, the numbers, he says 2 roles in the Beck supervisor, manages the Beck staff and systems, currently 7 volunteers, I would like at least 10, and then Beck officers, currently 11 volunteers, I would like at least 20. And then he says a big concern with our Beck staff. Apart from the difficulty in recruiting new volunteers, over the past couple of years there have been recruitment drives within Policy and Partnerships Unit and to staff generally via Casey. Briefly, is their availability to attend training? You see that?
Yep.
Now, very little appears to have changed from his report in October 2014 and his email in January 2016, apart from perhaps the recruitment drive to which you've referred and to which he refers here. Is that right?
I think that's probably fair, yep.
Yes. Then if we go, please, to page 1 of this email run, you respond, 26th of January 2016, to him, David, belated thanks. So you will kindly seek recruits to the former and let Tony and me know if that works. I'm happy to bang a drum for Beck personnel. Please can you do a draft extolling the roles? What action did you take to ensure that there was, in the end, the necessary number of Beck staff?
Well, if there is further email traffic with such a draft, then I would have used that to try and attract some volunteers.
Let me show you what Mr. Kerry told us in his oral evidence. Can we please have the transcript up for day 268, page 66? And on page 66 at line 2, he says, I'll just wait for this to come back up onto the
Yeah.
onto the screen. We can take it. We can live with what's there.
Yep.
Mr. Holgate, can you see the
I think so. Yeah.
text with the moving hand? If
Yes,
the hand
certainly.
stops moving, I can read it. It says, it had been the philosophy at RBKC for as long as I was there, not to have people appointed to roles and be on rotas, and certainly not to pay them to be on standby, but to seek volunteers for these roles. There are other reports I'd done in past years, 1 or 2 reports over the years, expressing the same concerns and considerations. And that's all I need from that. But why was there a philosophy not to pay staff to undertake these important roles, as in other boroughs such as LBHF?
Well, I think we were probably stuck with a practice that we should have changed. I mean, I gather the council does now pay people for fulfilling these roles, and we should have made that switch sooner.
Right. And I mean, it wasn't a problem about money, it was just a problem about adhering to old practices.
I think so, yes.
Yes, I see.
Yeah.
I see. And Mr. Kerry told us that the position as at January 2016 in numbers terms was pretty much at rock bottom, he said, and didn't substantially improve thereafter. That's what he told us at 268, page 70 at 10 to 11. Is that right? Was it the position by June 2017 that the overall numbers of trained emergency staff at RBKC had continued to decrease?
I've no reason to disagree with him.
Right. Do you accept, looking back on it, that the lack of staff had a huge effect on the ability to train and exercise RBKC contingency plans?
It probably would have affected the capacity to train other people, yes.
Yes. And we've seen from other material provided by Mr. Kerry that the overall number of borough controllers or BEC staff reduced from 24 to 20 by August 16 and then down to 16 by December 2016. Those are the numbers. Do they surprise you?
I wouldn't have known them at the time. They don't surprise me given what we now know.
And therefore, would you accept that there remained a significant shortfall in the number of council silvers trained to occupy that role as at June 2017?
Yes, I mean, that is compared to the number that David thought was needed, and I would look to him to assess such a number.
There were 3, compared with the recommended 10 that Mr. Kerry had recommended. Now, let's then turn to a different topic, minimum standards for London. We've heard some evidence about this, that RBKC, in relation to its Category 1 responder duties, fitted into the London Resilience Forum. Yes, and this is a structural point. Do you agree with that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, do you also agree, and we've seen plenty of structural material about this, but let's say we can take it quickly, the London Resilience Forum, or LRF, is split up into sector panels which represent the interests of different sectors. Yes?
Yes.
And you knew that at the time?
I think so.
And you understood that included, did you, the local authorities panel? Yes?
Yes.
And that brought together 33 local authorities across London, yes?
Yes.
And at the time of the fire was chaired by John Barradell.
Yes.
From the City of London.
Correct.
Yes. Were you aware at the time that RBKC resilience capability was governed by something called the Minimum Standards for London, or MSL, which was set by the local authorities panel?
I don't think I'd have been able to volunteer that information to you at the time. I might have been aware, but I don't recall it.
Very well. Now, let me just show you a document, LFB 20119219. This is the draft minimum standards for London 2016.1, which was in operation, even though it's called a draft, as at June 2017. Were you familiar, as at June 2017, with this document?
It rings a bell, but I wouldn't be absolutely certain.
No. I mean, the photograph on the front cover is...
Striking.
Is striking.
Yes.
And you would probably recall that, yes. And you don't recall it?
I wouldn't be able to tell you what was in it now.
Right. So you'd seen it, but you can't recall
I think I probably had, not only for the picture, but also the sort of logo at the top. It, as I say, it does ring a bell.
Yes. That logo, the multicoloured
Yes.
set of Olympic-looking rings all in a string, it appears on a number of different London Resilience documents. And the LAP logo on the right-hand side is something we will also be seeing as we go through. But if we go, please, to page 7, paragraph 9, do you remember that these minimum standards included an assessment of the operational response and contingency plans? You could see paragraph 9, MSL
Yes,
assessment.
I wouldn't have remembered that.
Right. Did you know that the most recent assessment before the Grenfell Tower fire in June 2017 took place in February 2016?
Right, I wouldn't have known that.
Right. Did you know what the outcome of the assessment was? Well, probably not. If
No.
You didn't know the fact of it. Were you aware, and I'm going to assume not, but correct me, that the RBKC scores included amber, which meant operational but requires development, for 4 particular areas? First, borough-level exercising. Second, humanitarian assistance. Third, shelter. And fourth, identification of vulnerable persons.
No, I'm sure I did not know that, because
Right.
I think that would have caused me some alarm.
Whose job was it to report those deficiencies in the assessments pursuant to the LAP requirements for minimum standards?
Well, I would have thought it would be the staff compiling our returns.
Right. Was there a system in place within the RBKC whereby the results of those returns would be reported to you if they were significant?
I do not think I got regular reports of that material.
Should you have done?
I'm sure I should have done. Yes.
Does that indicate that there was a deficiency in RBKC's oversight systems in relation to preparedness?
Yes.
Were you aware that for the appointment of a humanitarian assistance lead officer, or a HALO, that had scored red, which meant there was no operational capability or plan in place?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
Right. And would you agree that would you agree that role, the HALO role, is a pivotal one in the event of a significant emergency? And that is this right? Because the holder of that role requires knowledge of the council emergency plans and the wider London Resilience humanitarian assistance framework.
Yes.
Yes. Did you yourself appreciate the importance of the role of a HALO?
I think I did.
Before the fire?
I think I did, yeah.
Did you ever ask yourself or anybody else in your organisation, do we have one? And if we don't, why don't we?
No, I think, again, if I'd joined the dots, I mean, I would obviously have been very concerned, but I think I knew of the role in the abstract, and if you'd have asked me the question, A, I would have asked David or Tony Redpath, and B, I'd have assumed it would be someone in the Adult Social Care Directorate.
Well, now, under B, of course, adult social care was subject to the tri-borough arrangements, wasn't it?
Yes.
So had you asked, did it occur to you, perhaps, that if you looked at that role, you may very well have ended up identifying somebody who was actually not employed by RBKC at all?
Well, the idea of the tri-borough service was for staff to be flexible across all 3 boroughs. So even if their contract of employment had been with one of the other 2, they would have owed duties to Kensington and Chelsea as well.
How common were tri-borough arrangements across London?
They were unusual. They were an innovation that began to be planned in 2010 in response to the reductions in funding of local authorities that I mentioned earlier.
Right. And from your knowledge of the LAP, was it common or universal, perhaps, that a halo would be appointed from an adult social care department?
No, I wouldn't have. I wouldn't know where halos came from across London at large.
Right. What I'm really seeking to get at is whether, in those cases where a halo would or should be appointed from adult social care, there were some boroughs where the halo would come from within the borough, but some boroughs, in the unusual case of a tri-borough arrangement, where they wouldn't, RBKC being one of them. Can you help with that?
Well, I think what you have is an innovation in the form of tri-borough working, for which not necessarily every consequence had been worked through from the perspective of something like resilience.
Do you remember yourself being involved in any discussions about whether the tri-borough arrangements for pooling adult social care meant that there was an uneven distribution of the ability to have an in-borough halo across London?
No, I don't remember.
Right. So you see the point I'm driving at?
Yes, I do.
Yes. Do you accept that structurally RBKC as a body and its senior management and decision makers had no system in place whereby they knew that the council was, in the respects I've identified, the amber and the red, failing to live up to the minimum standards for London set by the LAP?
I do. As far as I can recall, I do not recall such an item appearing on any collective management agenda.
And in terms of governance and scrutiny, that was a failing on your part and on the part of the council?
I agree.
Thank you. And I think, as you told us earlier, I think you accept all the admissions made by RBKC in its written opening in this module.
I do.
And that would include the admission that there should have been more internal reporting up the management chain and should have been greater oversight, both of the team itself and the council's emergency response capability.
I absolutely accept that.
Yeah. Let's then go to RBK 30's 58010. This is an email run of March 2017, so a little bit less than 3 months before the Grenfell Tower fire. And it is an exchange between David Kerry and Tony Andrews of Westminster City Council. And we've heard a bit about Tony Andrews from earlier witnesses in this module. And it involves a query about the current state of play with humanitarian assistance board issues. It's a lengthy email from David Kerry to Tony Andrews. Hi, Tony. Sorry I wasn't able to speak by phone today. Rather a hectic day, dashing from meeting to meeting. And then there are 4 topics set out there. And I just want to focus on items 3 and 4, topics 3 and 4. 3, emergency rest centre staff. We have very few council staff trained as emergency rest centre managers and staff. We will, of course, call upon the British Red Cross under the MOU for ERC staffing, but this is, of course, not a guaranteed service. Our last recruitment drive using KCNet did not result in any new volunteers. Training for council staff volunteers would be carried out for us by British Red Cross under the MOU. Is it right that the last recruitment drive, the one that occurred, I think, between October 2014 and January 2016, hadn't produced new volunteers for emergency rest centre staff?
I have no reason to doubt that.
Looking at item 4, then, identifying vulnerable people, David Kerry says, this remains a considerable concern at RBKC. As discussed at the last meeting of the Humanitarian Assistance Board, RBKC does not have a good system for accessing details of vulnerable people out of hours. And then he goes on, unlike LBHF, we do not have a welfare bronze on rota. Unlike WCC, we do not have a Tony Andrews on 24/7 call. And then he goes on about it being raised. And also the possibility of a tri-borough welfare bronze rota. This issue, it appears, was something that to be raised at senior level. My question for you is, were you aware of that issue, the problem he identified here?
I don't think I was.
Should you have been?
I think I should have been, yes.
And again, does that point to a failure of oversight and a structural deficiency in RBKC's management line reporting?
I'm not entirely sure. I think that there is a balance between the person at the top continually prodding all those reporting to him or her, and a certain duty on those in possession of important information like this to keep emitting it to people who are accountable for it in the end.
Yes.
And plainly, that didn't work often enough. And I think what one might say in David Kerry's defence is that probably he felt that this was a thing he was banging his head against a wall on, and maybe he decided not to carry on doing that.
Right. But can you account for why RBKC did not have a good system for accessing details of vulnerable people out of hours?
No, I can't.
Can you account for why RBKC did not have a welfare bronze on rota as its neighbour borough did?
If that is an absolute requirement, then we should have had such a person on the rota. I would not have known off the top of my head that was an absolute requirement or a desirable requirement.
Right. Can you account for why RBKC, unlike Westminster, its other neighbour borough, did not have a Tony Andrews, a humanitarian assistance expert, on 24/7 call?
No, again, we should have done plainly.
Do you agree in the light of that RBKC, at least in those respects, was ill-prepared and incapable to meet its duties as a Category 1 responder at the time of the fire?
I think ill-prepared. I don't know whether we could have made up by other means. I don't know how incapable we should have been, even with those deficiencies.
Can I just ask you, was this a matter of a combination of identifying the persons who would fill these roles and perhaps paying them to do it?
I agree that, as the council, I gather, has now done, we should have taken the bull by the horns and made it much easier for people. I think probably we should have gone even beyond that with the benefit of hindsight, and we should have said, your role, to a number of people showing some willingness to take on such a responsibility, your role will only be 80 or 90% what it was before, and now it will be 10 or 20% of an emergency planning nature, and maybe your pay will need to be adjusted accordingly. So, we should have had a more structural, sort of reliable answer than just relying on volunteers.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, I want to turn, please, next to the events of the 14th of June 2017, and to start with the initial attendance on site. In your statement, you tell us that you first learnt of the fire at Grenfell Tower just before 3 a.m. when you woke up and heard the headlines, yes?
Yes.
And you go on to tell us at paragraph 18 of your statement that you immediately rang David Kerry, the RBKC contingency planning manager, to get an update, yes?
Yes.
And thereafter spoke with the leader and with Laura Johnson, who was Director of Housing, yes?
Correct.
And also, I think, officers from the media and communications team.
I think so.
At what time do you recall attending the scene?
I think it would have been around 4:30, probably.
Right. And why do you remember that particularly?
Well, because I think I was busy on email and the phone for a while. I had retrieved the copy of the emergency plan in the flat. And then after a while, my wife got up and we agreed that it would be a very sensible thing to go and look at the circumstances around Grenfell Tower. So we probably set off around 4, something like that.
Right. Now, at paragraph 19 of your statement, let's go to that, please. At page 4, your first statement.
Yes.
Well, no, RBKC 00035426. You say, at paragraph 19, having explained the visit to Harrow Youth and Community Club and the Rugby Portobello Trust. You say at any one time there were 2 to 4 rest centres in various stages of helping survivors. From what I saw, I was content that the rest centres were functioning properly. It was also clear that the council's response would involve many council services and staff. What did you see to lead you to the conclusion that the rest centres were functioning properly?
Well, I remember seeing one that had capacity but wasn't being fully used, and I remember at least one other that was very busy indeed. But they seemed to be helping people.
And did you see anybody from the council at any of those places?
No, I didn't.
Did you ask yourself why not?
I think I knew that there would have been the local authority liaison officers prompting where necessary and encouraging people to open up facilities, but I didn't expect them to be numerous, nor did I expect other council staff to be there that early, because a very critical fact, which I think you've covered with Laura Johnson yesterday, is that the great majority of borough staff live outside the borough, sometimes quite a long way away, and therefore there would have been a lag in people making arrangements to come to the borough much earlier than usual and getting there.
Well, that was a known problem, though, wasn't it? If an event happened outside office hours, for which the contingency arrangements were required to be activated, then that was a known problem.
Yes, and I thought that we had some measures that would have mitigated against that risk.
And what were those measures?
Well, I thought that we had agreement with several voluntary organisations in North Kensington for such an eventuality.
What, to take the place of RBKC staff?
Well, to be rest centres in the short term.
No, what I'm really asking you is access to your own paid staff at short notice in the event of a major emergency happening between the hours of, let's say, 5:30 p.m. in the evening and 9:30 or 9 o'clock a.m. in the morning.
Well, I think I could move both the evening time and the morning time to reduce the range when there would be significant staff, because people worked very hard in normal days, let alone days like that tragedy. But it is, I'm afraid, true that most staff were not living in or particularly close to the borough.
Yes, I'm sorry to harp on. What consideration was given to putting in place arrangements to have staff on hand, on call, in an emergency which happened out of normal routine office hours?
Yes, I think there were telephone trees, essentially, that there were arrangements whereby people would ring their direct reports, so the message would get out very quickly that there was a crisis to deal with, and I think people would then respond as best they could to come in as early as they could in this case.
Now, thank you. Now, you attended the scene and had seen firsthand the scale of the fire and the sheer number of people directly affected. What did you assess your immediate priorities to be at that time?
Particularly with my conversation with Laura Johnson, I thought the most urgent thing was to, via housing officers and social workers, get practical support to as many of the survivors as we could. So financial support, non-financial support, where, for instance, someone needed a medical prescription and that needed sorting out very quickly, and of course shelter by the time of the next evening.
Does that tell us that your priority at that stage, that very early stage, was the survivors?
Yes.
Yes. What consideration did you give to those who were not survivors from the tower but had been evacuated or in the process of being evacuated from the walkways?
Well, really much the same considerations apply to them. I mean, the focus was the people who had had the terrifying experience of being at risk, direct risk from the fire, and who would probably have had to evacuate their flats with little or nothing to help them. But I think that quite quickly the borough tried to do what it could for those laterally affected, as it were, by the fire.
And what about the families of those who were living in the tower and needed information about their loved ones?
Well, I have to say that wasn't absolutely at the top of my list, but I realise, of course, that it's a very important service.
Why wasn't it at the top of your list?
Because I was more worried about the people who had had this terrifying experience and who needed to be supported as soon as we could get there.
At the time you were at the scene, I think that the staff present were limited to 2 LALOs, and I think a third then attended later. Yes?
Yes.
Nicholas Layton and Mike Rumble, and a third. Is that correct?
I've no reason to doubt that.
And it's right to think, correct me if this is wrong, that additional staff did not attend to assist at rest centres until after 10 a.m. that morning.
I thought that at least some might have got there sooner than that, and plainly one would wish them to have got there sooner than that. I don't know what obstacles each member of staff faced in order to get to somewhere where they could be of help as quickly as possible, but I'm sure that it was their intent to get there as well equipped as possible, as quickly as possible, and that they would have had to judge how to surmount the obstacles to do that.
And do you think that lag of time until after 10 a.m. that morning was acceptable?
Well, it obviously isn't acceptable. If people begin a process that is absolutely horrifying and deeply traumatising, any time after about 12:30 or 1 o'clock in the morning, it is a long time to cope before people come with a specific duty and some empowerment to help you. Plainly, that is a very long wait.
Do you accept that it was the responsibility of RBKC to set up and to operate an emergency rest centre?
Yes, I do.
Within the meaning of the protocol?
Yes, I do.
And do you think that more staff could and should have been deployed earlier in order to assist at those emergency rest centres?
Well, I think that is a little difficult. But again, it's a bit like the point the chairman made earlier. What we could have done is we could have had more staff billeted closer to the borough, or we could have paid them an allowance or something like that. But I'd be intrigued to know whether others had different ways of solving it. I think the closest we came to an answer was to have an understanding with voluntary bodies who had facilities, who had premises. So it wasn't just lack of staff, it was actually lack of facilities. We had an office or two in North Kensington. We didn't ourselves own some large space which would have been repurposed automatically for this.
Now, I'd like to turn next to the Strategic Coordination Group meetings. And you cover that at paragraph 10 in your statement, page 3. This is RBK 3035426, page 3. And paragraph 10, you say, Borough Gold would work closely with non-borough agencies to coordinate the response, notably the Strategic Coordinating Group, SCG, of which I was a member and which was chaired by the Metropolitan Police. Do you accept that the core function of the SCG was to create and maintain shared situational awareness, among other things?
Yes.
And the first SCG in relation to this incident was at 5 a.m., wasn't it?
I believe so.
Yes, and the second at 6:30, yes?
Probably.
Well, you didn't. My point is you didn't attend either of those.
No, I didn't know. I think that they were occurring, and others, I think, attended on my behalf.
Did you not? You didn't know they were occurring?
I don't think so. Otherwise, I would have done my best to take part.
Right. Can you account for why you weren't aware that they were occurring, given that you were the chief executive?
Well, I would have. Someone would have told me.
Yes, but did they?
Well, I don't think they did. No, I think they. It's probably David took it on himself to attend on my behalf, and I would not criticise him for doing that. David at that stage was probably the best junction box the council had available to bring the council's perspective to the SCG.
Yes, but should he not have told you of the fact of the meetings So if not the 5 a.m. one, when you were still perhaps going around familiarising yourself on scene, but at least the 6:30 one.
Yes.
When did you discover that those meetings had happened?
I dare say he would have referred to them when we met in the town hall.
Right.
Around about 6:30, or thereabouts.
Yes. Well, let's pick that up in your statement.
Sure.
Page 4, please, paragraph 20 then. Foot of the page, you say, I arrived at the town hall about 6 a.m. and went straight to the Beck. I recall that David Kerry and others were there. Was that not an opportunity to attend this SCG meeting?
I think it would have been. As I say, I can't account for the fact that somebody didn't hunt me out and tell me that it was taking place.
No. Did you not even overhear the fact that it was taking place or see David Kerry go off to it?
I don't recall doing so. It may well be that he was doing something which seemed to be important that he carry on doing.
Now, others have given evidence. Well, there is contemporaneous evidence, notably an email from Toby Gould at 8:04, and for reference purposes, that's GOL 50218, that says that Nicholas Holgate was on the 6:30 SCG via teleconference. I think you're telling us that's not the case.
I don't. Well, I mean, it is possible. It's possible that I was, but I don't recall. As it were, outputs of that meeting or exchanges at that meeting which would have anchored me there. But I mean, if someone else thinks I was there, I'm reluctant to disagree with them.
What did you do at the Beck when you arrived?
I think I wanted to get an idea from David and others their appraisal of the situation and to tell them what I thought was the priority.
Did you observe any problems with the IT, problems with setting up the log?
Not at that point, no. I think I'm now aware that there had been a problem or two, but I don't think it was evident by the time I got there.
Right. When you did arrive, did anybody report to you? Did anybody give you a sit rep situation?
I think David would have done, yes.
Right. Now, you did attend the third SCG meeting at 8:30, yes? Mm-hmm. Let's look at the note, first of all, just to pin that down. MOL 6014. And this is an email from Toby Gould. I'm sorry. Yes, there it is. Major incident, North Kensington. London SCG minutes, 8:30, 14th of June, 2017. And you could see the time. You see that?
Yes.
And the attendees are on page 5. Just for pattern purposes, the attendees at these SCG meetings are always in a list at the end of the document.
Yeah.
And if you cast your eye down the list about halfway down, you can see local authorities, Nicholas Holgate, misspelt, Kensington and Chelsea, along with Rebecca Blackburn, Stuart Priestley, and David Kerry. Yes?
Yes.
So you were at the meeting. Mm-hmm. Let's just look at something else briefly. GLA 704. This is the statement of John Paul Graham of the GLA. He's head of city operations. And if we go in that statement, please, to paragraph 41, which we will find on page 8. He covers the strategic coordination meeting at 8:30. And in paragraph 41, he said in the second line of your attendance at that meeting that you seem to be very interested in my proposal, which was one of liaising with RBKC about the mayor's visit. and insisted RBKC be involved in any such arrangements. I was very surprised at this, and it seemed again to reinforce RBKC's skewed priorities in the aftermath of the fire. Mr. Holgate seemed to be more preoccupied on this call with minor issues such as the Mayor's proposed visit to the scene and the possible attendance of Nicholas Paget-Brown, leader of RBKC, rather than the more important strategic issues regarding handling of this crisis. Is that a fair observation or criticism?
I think it's absurd.
Why do you say that?
Because it would have been, it would have had a very, very modest importance, but in the sense that someone like the Mayor was visiting, we would, it would be a matter of courtesy to know and to be aware of it. But, the idea that it was an important issue compared with all the others is plainly absurd.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment?
Yes, if it suits you, I think it is.
Yes.
Well, Mr. Holgate, as you were told, we have a break during each session, and this is the time to have the morning break. We'll stop there, therefore, and resume, please, at 25 to 12.
Certainly.
And as I've said to all the other witnesses, you no doubt know this, but I have to ask you not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it once you're out of the room. All right? Thank you very much. Would you go with the usher, please? Thank you, Mr. Millett. 25 to 12, please. Would you ask Mr. Holgate to come back in, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Holgate, ready to carry on?
Certainly.
Good, thank you. Yes, Mr. Millett?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, let's take a step an hour or so back to the time of your arrival in the Beck. Between the time of your arrival in the Beck at about 6 or 6:30 a.m. on the morning of the 14th of June and the SCG meeting at 8:30, did you have any discussion with Tony Redpath or Stuart Priestley or David Kerry about seeking support from other councils, either through mutual aid on an ad hoc basis or through activating the gold resolution?
I think I would have remembered, without the prompting of David's and Stuart's evidence, that David, I think I can just about remember, did say that the fire was an exceptional crisis. And I'm more than prepared to accept that Stuart advised seeking mutual aid. So there was such a discussion in answer to your question.
And what did you do with that advice?
At that time, I'd given some thought as to whether we should invoke London Gold or not. I think there is an important distinction between invoking London Gold and accepting or seeking mutual aid across councils. So I think at no point was I against obtaining specific assistance from other councils where we knew we needed it. But at that point, I did not think that we needed to invoke London Gold as such.
Why is that?
Well, I'd given this as much thought as I could in the circumstances of the morning, and I thought that I had, and would still today for the specific officers in question, I had great confidence in the management team of the borough to respond well and to do a great deal of what was necessary as quickly as they could. And what I wanted to do was to try and work out whether it was better that the council responded as a cohesive management team, or whether it was better to bring in someone who was not familiar with the borough, who would undoubtedly have brought a handful of London resilience people with him or her, and who would have had to set up and get to know, as it were, not just the physical geography, but the human geography, and who was trying to do what already within the council. So at that time, I thought that there was an advantage to responding as the council with assistance where we knew we needed it, rather than passing the problem, huge problem, to another chief executive of another London borough who was simply the person on the rota.
Now, let's go, please, to RBK30's13296. This is slightly later in the morning. This is David Kerry's Beck Emergency Incident Log, which is his type log based on his handwritten notes, as he told us. He was satisfied that they were comprehensive, so I think we have to assume that that is the case, at least in this respect. And if I can take you, please, to page 10 in this document, row 2, 10 o'clock. You see that, 10 a.m., item 3. It says, meeting with David Kerry, Chief Executive Nicholas Holgate, Director of Housing Laura Johnson, CEO and KC TMO Robert Black, Council Silver Stuart Priestley. Do you remember that meeting?
Not as such, but I'm absolutely happy to accept what David says about it.
Right. Now let's go then to the right-hand side of the page. It says in the second bullet point, advice given by David Kerry to Nicholas Holgate. This incident is bigger than any one local authority in London can manage. Consideration should be given to asking for mutual aid for the Beck. There are people who can support NH and RBKC Gold Group, including John Barradell, and you can see his designation there, Eleanor Kelly at Southwark, Andrew Meek, who's the EP manager at Haringey, London's expert on humanitarian assistance, and Alistair Ayres of Hammersmith and Fulham, who managed the dedicated disaster mortuary for the Tunisia shootings. Did you consider at that stage taking that advice and using mutual aid that was available?
Well, again, I think there is a distinction between seeking specific assistance where we knew we needed it and invoking London Gold as such. So I was perfectly happy for the BEC to be reinforced by people practiced at managing BECs from other boroughs. And I talked to, I think Eleanor Kelly got in touch with me in the course of the morning, and you have some emails between me and her. And I think, but this is the faintest memory, I think that in the event Alistair Ayres thought that he should stay at Hammersmith and Fulham and stand up their BEC in case that was the right and helpful thing to do. But I may be quite wrong about that.
Now, what was your response to David Kerry's advice that this incident is bigger than any one local authority in London can manage?
Well, I wasn't expecting us to cope with it just as one local authority. I was going to and would be happy to accept help where it was required. I also had tried to work out what it was that we would need to do, and it was plainly, there's no argument that it was an extremely big disaster. But to me, the priority was reaching the survivors, as we have said, and I had high confidence in the borough's ability to be able to do that, and I thought that that was what we ought to do. So having convinced myself, however erroneously we can now see, having convinced myself that I thought it was better to have the responsibility cohesively run with a group of people who knew how to work together in ordinary times, could work together very well. Then, having convinced myself of that, I thought it was our duty and our responsibility to get on with it. And that was why I didn't then invoke London Gold.
Well, that's London Gold, but we're talking about mutual aid really here,
well,
which is the subject of the second bullet. Just breaking it down. First, did you agree with David Kerry, your expert in these matters, that the incident was bigger than any one local authority could manage? Did you agree with that?
Not quite, no.
Right.
So, because I had by then discussed what Laura was planning to do, and I think I may also have been in touch with Claire Chamberlain, I can't remember, but she is the Executive Director of Children's Services. And I thought that there were some very clear and urgent tasks, and the borough was capable of addressing those tasks. So, it is one thing to say it is a huge crisis, it is, but one then has to quantify or compare the tasks to which that gives rise and the tasks of which the council was capable. And I thought that if we proceeded as a team, working together, knowing one another well, the council would be able to respond effectively, at least to begin with. I wasn't sure about, days later, as it were, but to begin with, that was what I thought we should do.
Right. So, is it the case then that consideration was given by you to seeking mutual aid, but you rejected it and didn't, or rather, you rejected the advice that you should go to the people identified for support?
Well, as I say, Eleanor Kelly and I did, I think we both emailed and conversed soon after. Is this 10 o'clock? Yeah, well, it would have been, I think, later in the morning, but you have an email to that effect.
Now, let's go to RBK 30's 13318. This is Stuart Priestley's log of Wednesday, the 14th of June 2017. I should just tell you, this is not a contemporaneous note. It was made in the days after the incident. If we go, please, to the bottom of page 1, you can see it says 6:30, meeting with Robert Black, Laura Johnson, Nicholas Holgate, David Kerry, David provided an update as had been feedback to him by the on-site lay-low and gathered from the meeting he had dialed into. DK advised of the scale of the tragedy. Robert reported that he had attended the site and that it was very serious indeed. Nicholas advises, if you turn the page, Nicholas advises he has spoken with the leader who has agreed to fund anything necessary for the relief effort. David advises Nicholas of the mutual aid arrangements available via LLAG and our neighbouring boroughs. Nicholas stated, quotes, "That looks like we can't cope," close quotes. The conversation on mutual aid at that point ceased. Nicholas agreed to use the 11 o'clock senior management board meeting as the first gold group. David Kerry confirms he forgot to call Tony Redpath. I agreed to do so now. And then if one goes on, one can see that there are later meetings, but no 10 o'clock meetings. So in timing terms, there's a discrepancy between this record and the emergency log. First, do you remember whether the meeting was at 6, that is described here, was at 6:30 a.m. when you would just have arrived at the Beck, or at 10 a.m. some hours afterwards?
Well, it could have been both, of course. I mean, I think it's quite likely that we met on both, around both times.
Right. And do you recall, first, David Kerry advising on the scale of the tragedy?
Again, as I said earlier, I don't exactly, but I'm absolutely happy to accept his account of it.
Right. Do you accept that you said, when David advised you of the mutual aid arrangements available via LLAG and the neighbouring boroughs, that looks like we can't cope?
I'm not sure I would have used exactly those words, but again, if that's what Stuart recalls, I'm very happy to accept them. Right. They are not a happy choice of words. Again, what I mean by that is that, however erroneously, I thought that the borough could achieve the tasks immediately in front of it. And yes, we would need reinforcement, but the reinforcement could be specific and as necessary. It did not need to be put into a different process entirely.
What do you mean by the tasks immediately in front of it?
Well, essentially reaching the survivors.
Right, but when you say reaching the survivors, what do you mean by that?
And offering them all the help we could, to give them shelter the next night, to give them money, to try and sort out specific difficulties they have, and to begin a process, and a long relationship and process of trying to rehouse and so on, that further off into the future.
But would it not be right, or was it not right, that at that stage you didn't know how many survivors there were, and you didn't know what the boundaries of this event were?
That's true. I was implicitly working on the assumption that there were a lot of survivors and that the borough would be able to give many of them, hopefully all of them, help as soon as possible on that day.
And what about your own staff, given the pre-existing difficulties to which Mr. Kerry had drawn your attention historically? Why did you think that the borough could cope, even with these tasks immediately in front of it, given the numbers of staff in the Beck available?
Well, for some crises, the Beck is a very significant part of a borough's response. In this particular case, the Beck was still very important as a junction box for exchanging, passing on information in several directions. But actually, the housing department, as is evident from Laura Johnson's statement yesterday in your conversation with her, the housing department was going to work as a department pretty much entirely on the tasks as we've described it. And, that brought a huge number of people with relevant expertise to begin to reach the survivors.
Now, there are two different things. Let me just explore them with you. There's one which is your perception of whether, in fact, RBKC could cope with the tasks immediately in front of it, or tasks which are more intermediate. And there's the look of the thing. When you are recorded as saying, that looks like we can't cope, were you concerned about the look of the thing?
I don't think so. if I can backtrack just a little, you referred earlier to my civil service experience, and you know that civil servants are meant to be objective, impartial, neutral, and indeed council officers similarly. And I would assert very strongly that throughout my career I've been bothered about the substance, not the appearance. So I agree that it is a form of words which conveys an impression that I would not wish to give. But actually, I thought we were substantively capable of beginning the process of recovery. And if, having set lots of people working and people feeling they had the chief executive right behind them in doing so, I then say, well, hang on a minute, perhaps somebody else should take over and let's, listen to what they've got to say and so on, then I think that is giving of a rather uncertain note. And I do not think that that would have contributed positively to the exercise. And I think that was what I was trying to say.
Right. Just to be clear, are you quite sure that in saying what you're recorded as saying, you weren't at the time feeling a need to protect the council's reputation from inevitable criticism about being understaffed or having the lack of preparedness or capability?
Absolutely not. And indeed, if I had had that uppermost in my mind, it would have been a completely self-defeating proposition, and I would not have entertained it.
Now, Rebecca Blackburn refers in her first statement, we don't need to go to it, it's paragraph 21 on page 5, to a meeting between the contingency management team at 8:10 between you, David Kerry, her and Tony Redpath. Do you remember that?
I don't bring it to mind, no.
Was there you don't remember a discussion involving her at that stage, do you, about mutual aid?
I don't. Which is not to say that I dispute that it happened. I absolutely don't dispute it.
Do you accept? I think you do, because you've told us that, as RBKC has admitted in its opening statement, in fact, the leadership was unable to cope in the days after the fire.
I think that's absolutely right.
And I think you accept now that it was an error, or do you accept, that it was an error not to have sought outside help, including activation of London Local Authority Gold at this early stage?
I do. Under a duty of candour, I would retain a sort of very small quibble that we are imagining a complete counterfactual if I had invoked London Gold early on. And I think it begs a whole set of questions about exactly what would then have happened. But I agree and accept that, not least given the thematic evidence from the survivors that you had a week or so ago, that we were not coping very early on.
Now let's then turn to London Resilience and the contact you made with them on the morning of the 14th. Is it right that your initial contact with London Resilience, beyond where you were copied into the SCG minutes, happened after you'd spoken with David Kerry and senior management at the Beck?
Probably, yes.
Yes. Now, at GOL 50173, we find an email. Let's go to that, please. I'd like to go straight in it, please, to page 2, foot of page 2, where you can see an email at 7:44. There it is. Thank you. From Toby Gould to you. Do you see that? Copy to David Kerry. Nicholas, and then it says Andrew LLAG to 9, Chris LLAG from 9, and the Chris is the incoming LLAG.
Yes.
That refers to the on-duty
yes.
LLAG, doesn't it? Chris, I think, is Chris Naylor.
Correct.
I tried to call, but appreciate you're very busy. I understand you spoke to Matthew Hogan from our team earlier this morning and confirmed you were content for Kensington and Chelsea to participate in the SCG meetings / telephone conferences. Please let me know if that position changes and you feel there would be benefit in London Local Authority Gold participation to lead on any pan-London issues. I'm not aware of any at present, given the scene is contained within Kensington and Chelsea. You see that?
Yes.
And then it goes on about standing people up. We may come back to that. But you respond to Tony Gould, who is at London Resilience, at the bottom of page 1. If we can go to that, please. Foot of page 1. you can see it says, and this is you at 7:50, Toby, thanks. Aside from housing needs that may well spill over borough boundaries, I do not, brackets, yet, brackets, think LLAG needs to gear up. What did you mean by I do not yet think LLAG needs to gear up?
Well, I whatever else I thought that we were capable of doing, I knew that there was a possibility that we may not be capable of doing it. So, it would have been bizarre to have had 100% confidence in a decision or in a view taken, inevitably with some shortage of information as to whether the borough had an advantage in being the core of the response, or whether a bigger response that over time, perhaps quite quickly, perhaps not so quickly, would have drawn from other boroughs in a much larger fashion. So at no point, this rather illustrates my point, that at no point was I sort of manically against assistance, but I was first in favour of specific assistance where we needed it, and only later, when it became more obvious, did I invoke London Gold.
So is it right, would it be fair to characterise your approach at this stage as incremental? You're waiting to see how things develop before deciding whether to invoke London Gold.
I think that would be slightly too kind. I think I was probably more confident of the borough being able to give a very good account, to be able to make very good inroads into the various tasks lying ahead of it for, say, at least Monday. At least the Wednesday, at least the first day.
Do you recall having contact with the incoming duty LLAG, Chris Naylor?
I do.
Right, and I think he confirmed to you in a brief conversation in that morning that he remained on standby and at your disposal, yes?
Indeed.
Very good. Now, let's then turn to the TMO if we can. We've seen from David Kerry's Beck log that Robert Black, the chief executive of the TMO, was present at the Beck that morning and present at the Council Gold meeting at 10 o'clock. Do you accept that the civil contingency responsibilities for the response lay with RBKC as a Category 1 responder and not with the TMO in any capacity?
Yes.
Yes. Now, we've heard in phase 1 of the inquiry how a list of residents and plans of the building were not provided to LFB on the night quickly. When information was provided, we've also heard that it was incorrect or out of date. And that's the subject of the phase 1 report, paragraph 30.96, if people want to see it. My question for you, in light of that, is do you accept that the responsibility for providing that kind of information lay with the council, even if they might need to cooperate with the TMO to get it?
I'm not sure I'm fully qualified to give that answer, but I would accept that it lay across the TMO and the council, and if the TMO didn't have it, then plainly the council should or could have had it.
Right. Try it slightly differently. So far as RBKC needed to have up-to-date and accurate information about who was living where and whether they had vulnerabilities or not in order to discharge its obligations under the contingency legislation, regulations and framework, that was RBKC's responsibility, even if the information wasn't held within the council.
I think you must be right. Yeah.
What was the role of Robert Black at the Town Hall and Gold meetings on the 14th?
Well, I think that he would want to have been cooperating and his staff to be aware of the overall picture, and this would have assisted his understanding of what the council was doing. And I mean, he could have worked with the housing department without him being in the Gold meeting, but the Gold meeting was as convenient a place as any other, where he and Laura would be hearing the same material and working out what to do together.
What were your expectations of him and the assistance he could give you?
I thought that he could probably provide more staff, some of them with knowledge of some of the residents of Grenfell Tower, but I wasn't expecting a huge amount because I didn't know in depth the staff numbers or capacities that he would be able to provide.
What did you understand the wider role of the TMO to be in responding to this emergency?
Well, I'd have thought that they might have assisted in a small way with some rehousing, and I'm surprised that their information on who was resident in the tower was so imperfect, but I wouldn't have gone a long way further than that.
Right. Were you aware that TMO staff were assisting at rest centres and continued to create, to maintain and to circulate lists of safe or missing residents from the tower to identify who needed support?
I think I probably was available. I was aware of that because I think probably Robert would have made that clear.
Did you know that lists which were created, maintained and circulated continued to have inaccuracies in them?
I think I knew that they were not absolutely right, but they were what we had to work with.
Right. Was it the case that RBKC was heavily reliant on the assistance of the TMO throughout the time that RBKC was leading the response? Not just in relation to housing data, but physically.
I think I was aware that the TMO led on work to make the finger blocks habitable. So I was aware of some specific roles they undertook, which were, very much part of their housing management function. But I don't think I'd have known much more than that.
Right. And was it the case that RBKC, in the event, had in essence outsourced its functions to TMO staff? For example, assisting at rest centres and triaging survivors?
I think outsourcing might be too proactive a word. I think that TMO staff probably sought to give what help they could wherever they could, and those were amongst the things they ended up doing.
Well, let me try it non-proactively. Did you understand that the TMO were coming in to fill a gap in RBKC's capabilities?
I would not have described it that way if asked on the day. I'm perfectly prepared to accept it if that's how others slightly closer to what they were doing would have described it.
Well, how would you have described it?
I would have said that they were an extra resource and they were improving on the response that the council would otherwise have been able to achieve.
In what way improving?
Well, more pairs of hands, more people able to make a better rest centre at the Westway, for example.
But you're not saying that they were surplus to requirements?
No, I'm sure that we could have done with more people still.
Right. So that answers my question.
Okay.
Maybe try it again, though. Do you accept that they were coming in to fill a gap? In other words, to make right what was wrong?
I don't know what we would have achieved without them being there compared to what we would have achieved with them being there. I'm very reluctant to say no to your question, because if they were there in sufficient numbers and given that the overall effort fell short of what we wanted to achieve, I think you have to be right as a matter of logic.
Well, was it as a matter of logic, maybe that's right, but as a matter of what you understood or saw at the time, did you think at the time that RBKC, as a Category 1 responder, was unable to fulfil a number of its obligations without the assistance of the TMO?
I don't think I would have thought that on the day.
But do you accept it now?
I readily accept it now.
Yeah. Is it also right that on the day of the fire you personally received several offers of assistance from colleagues in local government, including chief executives from other London councils?
Yes, certainly.
And I think you referred to Eleanor Kelly in your evidence earlier this morning. We've seen that she at the time was chief executive of Southwark, and you referred to an email on that morning. Let's look at it. It's at GOL 50309. And I think it's also at 376, but because it's been referred to before, but this is an email first in chain to you at 6:50. So if we go to page, if we go to the bottom of the chain, please.
Yep.
6:51, I apologise. Eleanor Kelly to you at 6:51. Copy to Jerry Scott at Southwark. Dear Nicholas, just reaching out to offer any help we can to your officers regarding the serious fire in your borough. As you're aware, we experienced the terrible fire in Lacknell House, and so we have people across the council with both experience and understanding. Please do not hesitate to put any department in touch with us. Best, Eleanor. And you replied, if you go up the chain, please, at actually, we have this reply in a different email, which is GOL 30376. We just go to that. That's it. That's where you say at 6:56 in response to this email, Eleanor, many thanks. I will certainly be in touch if we need to be. And just pausing there, were you aware at the time of the fire that Eleanor Kelly was Deputy Chief Executive during the Lacknell House fire in July 2009?
Probably not, but I knew, I could see the link between her as Chief Executive of Southwark and Lacknell House, so I could see that she had relevant expertise.
Did you consider whether you could in fact benefit from her experience of leading a response following a major incident where a fire had occurred in a high-rise building in her borough?
Yes, but I think that her offer, and we did talk, I think, on the phone, and the offer I took up, which was in your other extract, was for the Director of Housing and another Southwark officer to come to the first Gold Group on the Thursday.
Yes, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. That's a response at 13:31.
Yeah.
There are one or two communications between 6:56 and 13:31 I just want to show you. First, RBK 401253. This is your email that you I think pass on to Laura Johnson. This is at the top of the string at 7:37.
Yep.
Also to Stella Bailey, who was at LBHF.
Well, in fact, she was a very experienced RBKC employee in adult social care who was on Hammersmith and Fulham's books, or she had an email address both in Hammersmith and Fulham and RBKC.
As part of the tri-borough arrangements.
Yes, but she originated in RBKC and knew an awful lot about the borough.
Right, I see. Yep. And then copy to David Kerry. And all you're doing is, all you say is, please let us call on Southwark colleagues if we have anything on which they might be able to help. Is it fair to say that you didn't at that point know how the council might use help from Southwark?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, thank you. And then let's look back at the 1331 email at GOL 50309. This is your response back to Eleanor Kelly again, and you say, Eleanor, thanks again. Chris Naylor has put me in touch with Jonathan Toy, and the Director of Housing here is in touch with your Director, Jerry, ? If you have any particular names or specialisms to put forward, I would be grateful. Just occasionally people do not say they are struggling when they are, so having a few names and a few words on the role each played / could play would help me if I sense we are running on empty. How likely did you envisage that RBKC would be running on empty, as you put it, during the response at that stage?
Well, at that stage, not. But I think the picture began to change 24 hours later, essentially.
Right, so does that tell us that you considered the level of response required by RBKC to be sustainable at least in the short term?
Yes.
And what about in the medium term? Did you think about that?
Yes, I did, and I was particularly concerned about the range of centres and facilities which needed to be set up so that, as according to the contingency management plan, there was everything that the survivors, the bereaved and others would need. So it was beginning, perhaps not on the Wednesday, but certainly on the Thursday, to begin to worry me quite a lot that whether we had the capacity, management capacity, to be doing all those things at once.
Now, the second person you got assistance from, or you got an offer of assistance from, was Mary Hartley, who was the chief executive of Hounslow. Yes?
I don't recall what order they came in, but it's quite likely that she did. Yes.
Right. Let's go to RBK 3064627. This is her email to you at 9:35, which I want. Second email down on the string. Any help, subject, any help you need, just ask. You see that?
Yep.
And she says, if any of us here at Hounslow, members or officers, can help you and colleagues in any way at all today or over the next days, please just ask. Thinking of you, Mary. And you respond to that. Thank you, at 10:31. Thank you for thinking of us. We should be able to manage, but if I see any shortfalls, I shall be in touch. Now, this is after, in chronological terms, as we've seen, the either 6:30 or 10 o'clock meeting that you'd had internally with Robert Black and David Kerry and Stuart Priestley, where the advice was given to you to consider LNAG or mutual aid. Can we take it by this, that at this point you had, as it's clear here, essentially refused to do that, or rejected that advice, and just made a decision that you were going to continue to manage?
I still, at that stage, thought it was better to take responsibility myself as a gold, but I was not, as it were, adamant in any way that we, in every particular, would have all the staff that we needed. And it felt to me, as it happens, these sorts of messages were very encouraging, because I thought that we would, if we identified a shortfall, I knew that there were neighbouring boroughs that would respond very positively if we asked them for a particular, housing officer, social worker, media, whatever it would be.
I see. Looking then at RBK 3064675, second email down in this chain. This is an email from Helen John at the DWP, Central Government. She was in the Stewardship Directorate. To you, if subject dreadful news, timing 8:41. If there's anything I can usefully do, let me know. Work won't miss me for a day or two. Take care, Helen John. And your response is at 13:25. If we look at that, so we can see. Helen, thanks and very kind of you. We think we are coping. The main things are intensely practical at this stage: hotel rooms, cash, and buying people essential goods. Were those your priorities at that stage?
Yes.
Right.
And for the avoidance of doubt, of course, this wasn't the DWP officially. This was a colleague whom I'd worked with when I was a civil servant, offering help in a personal capacity.
But no doubt about it, if central government and the full force of central government was being offered through your personal contact and you needed it, you could have had it.
Well, we may come to central government, but it wasn't clear really what they could or would offer.
All right. Would you agree, though, thus far, that the consistent message from you to those who offered help from early on the 14th of June was that RBKC was managing and didn't need help for the time being?
I thought we were managing, yes. I mean, it may be worth dwelling on this a moment longer in the sense of saying, if you are in the position of sending several dozen and at times scores, even according to a note, hundreds of staff out to do certain tasks, there is a period of time in which disbelief is suspended, and you don't know for certain how well they are or are not achieving those tasks. So it isn't, the feedback is not necessarily instantaneous, and sometimes what you do get feedback may not tell you exactly what you need to know in terms of asking for more help for this task or that.
Now, another source of help was Charlie Parker at Westminster. I think you knew him quite well.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think it's right that he called you in the early days because he was worried about you personally. Is that right?
I think that's correct.
Yeah. Do you remember him telling you on either the 14th or the 15th of June that RBKC would not be able to cope?
Not in so many words, no.
Not in so many words. Let's go to GOL 50158, please. Email chain, page 2. Now, you're not, I think, on this email chain, which is perhaps the point, but if you go to page 1, which is where it starts, at the foot of page 1, I'm sorry, page 1. This is now June the 15th, 2017 at 9:42 p.m. So it's the evening of the 15th of June. And it's from Charlie Parker at Westminster to John Barradell and Eleanor Kelly at Southwark. Subject, Kensington, both. I just wanted to say well done for getting Nicholas to agree to London Resilience Help. I've tried to get him to recognise this is too big for RBKC, and we've offered a wide variety of help, but he hasn't been able to acknowledge that it would be necessary. I fear he doesn't quite understand the implications and wider significance of what's going on. However, I have had a long conversation with him tonight, especially about his personal resilience and a range of operational issues. We've offered a number of key personnel, including a colleague who handled all the Southwark Fire comms in 2013, I think, and then it goes on about housing opportunity, permanent housing opportunities. Do you recall a conversation with Charlie Parker before the evening of 15th of June 2017 when he did try to get you to recognise that the incident was too big for RBKC?
I don't think that he said that in those terms. I think what he may have done is seek to explore what we were doing and how we were coping in such a way as to prompt me to reach such a conclusion. So, I think that if a number of local authority chief executive colleagues had said in terms, you may think you can cope, but you are not coping, or you will not be able to cope, I would have taken that extremely seriously. Right. Also, I think if the timing of this email, did I see the timing of this email was 9:42 p.m.
PM, on the evening of the 15th.
I think it is perfectly possible that he had a call with me after. I think actually it's implicit in the email that he had a call with me after I had invoked London Gold. And, Charlie is essentially saying well done to the others for, mutual agreement at some call earlier that evening that plainly we weren't succeeding and London Gold was necessary.
Right. Well, let's just examine that chronology just a little bit more closely then in light of that. Can we look, please, at our CLG 408314. This is an email run from the 16th of June, and if we go, please, down to page 2, there's an email at the bottom of page 2 from Charlie Parker to Councillor Nikki Aiken, copied to others at Westminster, and the context is the decision that I think had been made for John Barradell to go in to RBKC as chair of LAP. But if you then go up the chain to Nikki Allen's response, she says, only took them 2 days to decide they can't cope. We told them first thing on Wednesday that they wouldn't be able to cope. Now, do you remember that?
No. And I'm sorry to have to volunteer something disagreeable, but just before the break, you showed me an email that was really someone obsessing about reputation management. I think reputation management is very much the theme of these communications, but it is not my reputation or Kensington and Chelsea's reputation. It is the reputation of those in this email chain that we are talking about.
Well, was it a fact, just to answer the question if you wouldn't mind please, is it a fact that either Westminster or others told you first thing on Wednesday the 14th that you, RBKC, wouldn't be able to cope?
No, it is not a fact. I can imagine how Nikki Aitken would have come about this impression.
How?
But it is not a fact.
Right, how would she have come about
It would have come about through reputation management on the part of others.
Why would others be interested in managing their reputation?
Well,
What was the problem?
the problem would be that this was a huge tragedy, and not only would, of course, Kensington and Chelsea come under intense scrutiny, but also arrangements around London Gold itself. So I think people would be anxious as to what role they thought they had played or perceived they had played or would want others to perceive they had played.
Do you remember that Emma Strain was the person in charge of, she was Assistant Director of External Affairs at London Councils. Do you remember that?
No.
You don't? Let's just look at a document, RBK30655051. This is her email to you on the 15th of June, and we've jumped to that date for reflective purposes. This is where she offers the assistance to you of additional volunteers with sorting out donations and help with communications. Remember that?
I don't actually, but I'm sure it's plain there that it should have reached me. Yep.
Right. Now, we know, but let's go to RBK404229, because we see in that email that you forward this email on to Debbie Morris, who at this stage was RBKC's donations lead during the response.
Yep.
And she's provided a witness statement to the inquiry at RBK30355581, and she explains this, but at paragraph 23. But if you look at this document, you say to her, Debbie, I don't think we want cash donations, but if people want to give to the Just Giving or other websites, that would be fine. We don't want physical items. Agreed. In the light of the pressure, though, that the council was facing in relation to communications being completely inundated, why did you think, or why did you not think, that using this type of assistance offered by Emma Strain was helpful?
Well, it's the sorting out of donations. I think that would have been fine if that was a sort of physical a contribution of members of staff, and that would have been up to Debbie to respond to, just as Emma Strain says, pass me on. I'm passing her on to actually not just Debbie Morris, but to a number of others there. What I didn't want them to do is to think that they needed to make cash donations, because the borough was perfectly capable of meeting the cash needs, not least with the Bellwyn scheme. That wasn't an issue. What was at issue would be help with physical items where we did need help, and that was what Debbie was then engaged upon. I didn't think there needed to be more physical items donated, because actually the public response on the Wednesday was huge and wonderful. But actually it was so huge that it became a task in itself to corral the donations and organise them in such a way to be of practical use to the survivors.
But why not adopt the offered help from GLA in order to send the message out, we don't want physical items, please stop sending them in, they're inundating us, if you want to give by Just Giving? Why not use the offered assistance?
Well, as I say, I think volunteers folded into the command of the person in charge of corralling the physical donations was fine. That would have been for Debbie to take Emma up on that offer. So that's Team London Volunteers. Then there's a question about donate cash. Well, not to us, but to independent and charitable routes, that would have been fine. And then she says, "Is it also, please do not donate any?" Yes, well, it was. We don't want more physical items.
You were also, I think, offered assistance on the morning of the 14th of June from central government. Do you remember that?
I think I was. I think it was of a tell us what you need sort of open offer rather than a specific thing.
Yes. RBK 405766, email to you from Melanie Dawes, who was the permanent secretary to the DCLG at 0907. You can see it, second email down. Dear Nick, just wanted to express how shocked and sad I was to hear about the terrible fire at Grenfell Tower this morning. We are ready to help however we can from central government. Joe Farrer from DCLG is already leading on this. Obviously, today you'll be dealing with the immediate response, but do let us know, as and when it's helpful, if there is anything we can do. That was at 9:07. And at 9:09, 2 minutes later, you responded to her, "Many thanks, plenty of blue light resource at present." So that was your response. Did you go back to her, or did you think of going back to her at any later stage, particularly during the 14th of June, and change your mind and say, well, actually, we would like some help, please, from central government?
I don't think I did consider doing that. I thought I knew something about what central government could or couldn't do, having been a civil servant for some time, having had contact with DCLG over the years in which I'd worked in local government, and it was not immediately obvious to me what central government as such could do in the immediate aftermath. Plainly, there were things they could do a little bit further down the line, notably financial, but on that day, I didn't think that they were a source of specific or practical help.
Very good. Okay, did you know that Joe Farrer had tried to contact you during the 14th, but you weren't available to speak to her?
I think we may have missed calls or something like that. I think I was able to talk to her on the 15th.
Right, but I think the upshot of your evidence is that during the 14th and indeed the 15th, your view was that you didn't need any assistance from central government.
I didn't see what assistance they could really provide as central government at that stage in the crisis.
Now, let's then turn to the first Council Gold meeting that you attended. That was at 11 a.m. on the 14th of June, yes?
Yep.
And you chaired it, yes?
Yes.
And what do you say to those who say that a gold meeting or strategic meeting should have been held at an earlier point in the day?
I say that might have impeded the work that Laura Johnson and adult social care colleagues and others were doing, briefing staff so that they could get on up to the scene of the tragedy.
Did you consider having a gold meeting earlier in the day, but then put it off till 11 o'clock, or was this the first moment that you
I thought that we were in train trying to get help to the site, and that was the priority for people who would then attend the London Gold meeting, the RBKC Gold meeting.
And if we go to the meeting, note RBK 30132771, we can see who was in attendance, and we can see, if you go to page 3, that at the bottom of the page it says NH reported that a number of other boroughs have offered their help, and we can call upon their resources and to establish a rota of officers at the rest centre. Was it the case that at that point, I think it is, that you hadn't accepted any of the offers of the help from other boroughs?
I don't think I'd accepted any specific offer by then.
Right.
I think that the 2 officers from Southwark I obtained soon after this meeting. Yep, on the chronology.
Now, if we go back a page, please, to page 2, you can see that this meeting records and the third bullet point down, although there were no council officers present at the rest centres for a long time, they are now there. Were you satisfied during the 14th of June and particularly at this point in the morning, that there were sufficient RBKC staff at the scene supporting those affected by the fire?
I was under the impression that there were, but I would not have said that I would not have been confident of them getting there much before 9, maybe even 10 o'clock.
What led you to be confident that there were?
Well, again, it's a lack of contraindication. It's people, as far as I was aware, no one saying we have a desperate problem at such and such. We don't have any cover.
Did you go out to the rest centres to see for yourself which RBKC staff were there and what they were doing?
No, I didn't. I think it is expected or part of the protocol of the contingency management plan that the gold is pretty proximate to the Borough Emergency Control Centre, not necessarily sort of sitting in the room, but very contactable, very close by. Right. And after my visit up to the scene of the disaster early in the morning, I didn't think I should absent myself again that day.
What was your assessment that day, perhaps coming into the afternoon, of the way the rest centres were operating?
I think if you'd asked me exactly that question at the time, I would have said that I was under the impression that the voluntary sector had done a very good job in providing some shelter, some respite, some sustenance for the survivors, and that we were probably in the process of trying to whittle down the number so that we had one large facility to look after instead of coming to deputise at or support a number of them.
Now let's look at RBK 3037123. This is an email from Councillor Mills sent to you and Councillor Nicholas Paget-Brown and Laura Johnson at 12:59 on the 14th of June. Dear officers, I spent time there this morning, and we'll go back now. She gives her telephone number. Yep. The Trust wanted to know if you can send an officer to help liaise with the different agencies and act as a coordinating voice. Most grateful if you can. Do let me know if I can assist also, and of course my mobile will be on alert. Was it the position that there was an absence of RBKC leadership at the rest centres that were operating?
I think it must be so, yeah.
Why?
I think for a little while at least, we were depending on the people who had very kindly opened them up and were running them. But I think that we were trying also to find people who would go and take over from them as soon as we could.
And that was still happening, was it, by 1 p.m?
I'm a bit surprised that it's still happening then.
Right.
It is just possible that Councillor Mills thought that there was, as it were, someone in addition to whoever might also have been there doing something specific for anyone taking shelter at that rest centre.
Right. Let's go to RBK 3737309 next. This is an email from Rockfielding Mellon on the 14th of June at 14:42 to you, Westway. We are getting more messages about Westway Sports Centre being in chaos. Who is going to manage it, and when will he get here? Sorry, get there. Maybe let Angela McConville know so she can give name of their manager there. Were you concerned that there were reports of, as he calls it, chaos at the Westway?
Yes, I'm sure. Yes, that's a very strong word to use.
Well, did you seek to understand what was going on there and why it was in chaos?
I can't honestly remember what I did, but I suppose I would have inferred that there were a lot of people in need of help and it not being clear who to go to, or the people who were there helping were in short supply compared to those needing help.
What did you do in response to this message?
I think I checked that there were people who could be sent up there to help. I can't imagine what else I would have done.
Who would you have checked with? Or who did you check with?
I don't know. I mean, I might have started with Laura and gone on to social care colleagues.
Right, but Laura was housing.
Yes, indeed. But there would have been, I would have thought there would have been housing officers there undertaking their role. So she might have had a perspective on what else was needed.
Had you thought that this...
I don't know the answer to that question, let me be clear. I'm guessing.
Let's go next to RBK30's 13272. What I'm showing you next here are the minutes of the RBKC Gold meeting that happened at 3 o'clock on the 14th of June. You are present, and you can see who else was present. Robert Black also present. And if we go, please, to page 2, where you see in the second bullet point down, under issues and actions arising from the meeting, it says, second bullet point down, we were short of senior managers at the rest centres. The board was invited to submit a list of volunteers with corporate cards to TR who could help manage to keep the centres open, supporting the specialists until the people have been cleared. TR, I think, is Tony Redpath.
Correct.
Would you accept that that was a constant problem on the 14th of June and one which continued until the next day?
Yes, I would.
Why was there a shortage of senior managers at the rest centres?
Well, I think we had probably misjudged the extent to which we needed to be present there in significant numbers compared to the possibility that a smaller number of people, with the help of those running the Westway Sports Centre itself, might have been sufficient.
You say you may have misjudged. Was it a misjudgment on the day about deployment of available people, or was it an historic misjudgment about preparation?
Probably both.
Certainly the second would include the first, but
yeah.
Yes, I see. Was that a reflection of the fact that RBKC, in fact, structurally and in resource terms, couldn't cope with the scale of this incident?
I think, well, it was becoming clear. It was not clear enough to me on the day. On that Wednesday, we were in continuous sort of call and response mode, I would say. We were seeking to do better. We knew certain things we had to do. Other things then needed to be added to that list. And I think that forms part of the cycle of action and reaction over the course of that day.
And did this message from Rockfielding Mellon, the Westway was in chaos, not prompt you to reconsider whether or not you should be seeking external mutual aid or indeed triggering the LLAG gold arrangements? I
thought it was a problem that could be solved within our capacity rather than escalating.
Why did you think that?
Because there were significant parts of the council who were not completely under the cosh already and to whom I could turn for further support. So Debbie Morris looking after the donations was one example. I think Sue Harris took on creating a rota that would help with the Westway Sports Centre, and it was a case of absorbing tasks across the breadth of the council.
Did you discuss that very question with David Kerry or Stuart Priestley or Tony Redpath at the time? So mid-afternoon.
I don't remember a specific conversation on that.
Right. Let's then go next to GOL50's 159, which is an email at 1426, sorry, on the 14th of June, second email down from John Hetherington to Chris Naylor, the on-duty LLAG, and this provides a general update on the situation, and there's a response from Chris Naylor at the top of the string, into which you are copied, as well as John Barradell at this point, and the response is simply a thank you. But if we look down at the substance, in the third paragraph it says, can you see, third line down from that start of that paragraph, cordons remain in place. Can you see that? third paragraph, there are 6 confirmed fatalities.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the cordons remain in place. And then says, RBKC have opened a number of reception centres and a friends and family centre for this, looking for people involved in the incident. They have support from LBHF for the reception centres and have received supportive offers from a number of boroughs. At present, they are managing within demands and assessing the exact need for support. There is a cross-Whitehall meeting at 1600 hours, which Nicholas will be on the call to represent local government. The focus at present is for RBKC is sorting out the practical and accommodation needs for those affected by the incident. Was that an accurate summary of the position as it stood at the time as you saw it?
Well, I think the last sentence is correct. I think that given what we've just seen, to say RBKC have opened a number of reception centres is not right, because the voluntary sector opened reception centres for the most part. I mean, I think Westway might be different. At present, they are managing within demands. Well, we were in the process of trying to ensure that we were, so I think that is probably too optimistic. But we were trying to assess the exact need for support, certainly.
Right.
So it's not perfect.
Right. So you were intending to manage within demands, thought you were, but in fact weren't.
I think that's fair enough.
Right. Now, then let's turn to the first ministerial meeting, Cross Whitehall. As it says in this email, there was to be one at 1600 hours. Was it the case that you received the invitation for that meeting, but due to an administrative error, not of your making, you were unable to join the call?
I'm pretty certain I didn't join it. The reason for not joining it, would not come naturally to mind.
Right. But there are records within the inquiry's disclosure that show that, but you don't know anything about the reason, but you didn't join it. You saw that it was going to happen, though, from the email that you got or copied into from Chris Naylor to John Hetherington. Did you follow that up and seek to join the Cross Whitehall meeting?
I don't remember. There are quite a few meetings, and I'm not sure when the strategic coordinating group meeting was at that time. I think my own council goal meeting had finished before it, but I'm not sure about I think the SCG might have been 5:30, so it should have been possible. Yeah.
Yes. Were you asked to provide any information to the Cross Whitehall meeting before it happened?
I don't remember doing so, and I would have been very surprised if I wouldn't have written an email to that effect if I had been asked to do so.
Right. Let's go to CAB 402714, minutes of that meeting. So that's CAB 402714. There it is. Ministerial meeting, Grenfell Tower Fire, 14th June 2017. Now, we don't have a record of your receiving these minutes after the meeting, either in an email or in the documents in your possession. Do you remember seeing these minutes after the meeting at all?
I'm pretty certain I wouldn't have seen them.
Not, right. Let's go to page 1, B at the bottom. Immediate shelter and medium-term rehousing, that was listed as a key issue. And then underneath that it says, the local council were presently identifying temporary accommodation for those residents of Grenfell Tower. Longer-term rehousing would also be the responsibility of the council. The council were not currently asking for additional support. I think from your evidence this morning, that correctly summarised the position, didn't it?
Yes, I think that's fair enough as a summary. Yeah.
Were you contacted after the meeting about why you weren't there, or perhaps to get or to be the recipient of an update? Do you remember?
No, I don't recall that.
Right. Then let's move on in the day then to the meeting with John Barradell at 17:30 on that day, 14th of June. Let's go, please, to GOL 50155. We can see the invitation and the agenda for that meeting. And at it were to be you, Chris Naylor, John Barradell, John O'Brien, John Hetherington, and Mark Sawyer. And the agenda items: significant changes to the situation overview and pan-London coordination structures in place, John Hetherington and Nicholas Holgate. Immediate and longer-term support, requirements for RBK&C, Nicholas Holgate. Wider London implications, all, it is anticipated to take approximately 15 mins for the call. And that was sent at 16:10, yes?
Yes.
And you, as you can see, got that invitation. Now, what was your understanding? Oh, well, let me ask you this way. If you look at the text, it says a telephone conference has been organised for 17:30. The purpose of the call is to understand the likely support RBKC will require and how this can be best supported across local government and in particular strategic support to Nicholas. Secondly, to consider the wider implications for RBKC and London and what initial actions are required. Was it you who prompted that call and the purpose of that meeting?
I don't think so.
So is it thrust upon you, essentially?
Well, very welcome. I think it was a very welcome initiative on London Resilience part.
Right. Was it your view at the time that the call had no purpose because you didn't need support?
No. I thought that the value of the call, in addition to anything that other copy recipients thought they would get from it, the value of the call would be for me to give an account and for others on the call to say, have you thought of X, or what you've said on Y is either reassuring, not reassuring, and so on. It was a way of people who had thought more deeply about emergency planning than I had to hold me to account in a kindly fashion, but nevertheless an effective fashion.
That's not how it comes across, though, is it? In John Hetherington's text of what he says in the email.
No. Well, I mean, what he says is absolutely fine as far as it goes, but I think that the subtext was, are you managing, and do you need to invoke London Gold or not?
Did it occur to you at the time to ask yourself the question, well, why are they asking me that? I'm managing fine.
I would not have taken so presumptuous an attitude. I think having talked to Eleanor Kelly earlier in the day, and also having seen some of the toing and froing and the efforts we were making to try and bring help, there was room for doubt. There was room for it not knowing as much as I could have done, and sharing where I thought we were with this particular set of copy recipients was as good a way of stress testing what we were then doing as I could find.
Is it fair to say that by this stage, tea time on the 14th of June, that you were beginning to have doubts about your confidence in the ability of RBKC to cope on its own without external help?
I think I was probably still thinking that we were in the throes of a response and that we were making some progress. I mean, I took some comfort at both Gold meetings from what appeared to be, and what I think was actually, some good progress on the part of the Housing Department, which Laura Johnson sets out in her statement, for example. So, you know, I knew that I did not know, but I did not know how far we were falling short. And having an interlocutor who was independent of the efforts that the council was making, but who had given thought and had a relevant professional background, was a very good way of trying to either affirm or refute that we were doing enough in the right way.
Now, according to John Barradell's inquiry witness statement, number 1 at paragraph 31, he refers to various issues facing RBKC that were subject of what he says there were extensive discussion on the call. Can you help us with what those were? Well, do you agree, first of all, there was extensive discussion of various issues?
Well, extensive implies that it went on for quite a long time. I think I'd be surprised if it lasted as short a time as 15 minutes, but I'm not sure it went on a very long time. What I do recall is John Hetherington's account of that telephone meeting, and I think I remember thinking that that was a perfectly reasonable account of it when I saw it.
I see. Do you remember whether questions were asked about the sufficiency of resources in relation to temporary housing or social workers or communications or community cohesion and things of that nature?
I don't remember the specifics of the call, I'm afraid. I think John's account is all that I would sort of recollect at one remove.
Right, let's look at that and see if what I'm putting to you is what you're referring to by his account. GOL 50181. This is an email of 1859 at the 14th of June from John Hetherington to you and Chris Naylor, John Barradell and Mark Sawyer and John Bryan. Good evening, a short précis of the telephone conference. And that you can see what's then set out underneath
Yes.
that. Is this what you're referring to? As
Yes, it is, I think so.
So you've read this recently, have you?
A few days ago, probably.
Right, but having refreshed your memory from it, you don't have any quarrel with its accuracy as an account of the...
No, I thought at the time it was accurate, and I've no reason to change my tune on that.
Right. Do you know why a full minute wasn't taken of the meeting?
Well, I mean, that may just be people trying to convey the substance of a meeting in a under considerable time pressure, making sure that the headlines are circulated as quickly as they can.
Now, John O'Brien has provided a witness statement to the inquiry. Let's just look at that, please. It's LOC 704, and let's look at page 3 in it. And I'd like to look with you, please, at paragraph 7. This is about this meeting, and he refers to the 1859 note we've just looked at, which he exhibits. And he said, the note does not record Eleanor Kelly as being present on this call, and I do not recall her being so. During the call, I said to Nicholas Holgate that if the council's political leadership thought it would be helpful at any point to have a conversation with other borough leaders, I would be happy to see if I could facilitate that. My recollection is that on the call, Nicholas Holgate related the response actions being taken by the council to that point in time, working with other partners, and answered some questions on that from other participants on the call. Just pausing there, is that right?
That seems right to me.
Participants asked Nicholas Holgate to consider further specific assistance that the council may require from other boroughs. Is that right?
I think it's very likely they would have said such a thing. I've no difficulty with that.
Right. And then Nicholas Holgate acknowledged the many offers of mutual aid that had already been made and welcomed further steps, including the invitation to receive further experienced officers the next day, were agreed as detailed in the note. Do you agree with both of those?
I think that's right.
Right, thank you. Now, if we go back to the précis of the meeting, please, at GOL 50181, which you've accepted, it says under immediate and longer term support, LB Southwark will send 2 officers, senior officers with recent experience and longer term experience of recovery following the London Bridge and Lakenal House incidents. And underneath that, 4 lines underneath that, City of London have offered communications team support to RBKC. This will be arranged direct between the 2 comms teams. London Resilience will work with RBKC to ensure the right support to humanitarian assistance and recovery going forward. You've accepted the accuracy of that as a subject of discussion. Was there any support offered that you didn't accept? Any specific support?
I don't think so.
Did anyone advise you that the incident was too big for one local authority to deal with?
No.
Was activation of the London Gold Resolution discussed by anyone on that call?
I don't think it was explicitly discussed, but I do think it lurked underneath the conversation. And I think that, I mean, if I had either changed my mind by then or if the answers to the questions had been insufficiently encouraging, then I think I would have expected and they would have been well within their rights to say, we think you should invoke London Gold.
Right. And you say it lurked under the surface. Was that purely because of the identity of those on the call? Chris Naylor being the on-duty LAG, LLAG, John Barradell, John Bryan and Mark Sawyer.
I think that it was an obvious choice.
Yeah.
And they were right, absolutely right, to seek to explore whether the choice should be made.
And you say in your statement at paragraph 32, at page 6, there's no need to go to it, that at that stage no one seemed to envisage an escalation in the response of local government. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And I think you say you could have escalated your response and asked colleagues from other boroughs to take charge on behalf of London boroughs as a whole, but essentially you chose not to do so. That's
Correct.
At that stage.
Correct.
And was that because you thought that the two colleagues coming from Southwark and the offer of the comms team was enough?
Well, and Mark Sawyer and people from Hammersmith helping at the reception centre or the Beck or both, and other arrangements of which I might not have been aware and which management colleagues were completely at liberty to adopt. So again, it was absolutely not a case of RBKC managing all on its own, but of trying to fill out where they needed to do so.
Did you have any further telephone conversation with John Barradell that evening?
I don't believe so.
Now, I just want to look at two other limbs of support and the circumstances in which they were provided. First, John Barradell tells us in his first witness statement to the inquiry that it was agreed during this call, the 1730 call on the 14th of June, that he and Eleanor Kelly, who was, as we know, from Southwark, would provide support or peer support to you. That doesn't appear to have been mentioned in the post-meeting précis, other than that Southwark would send two senior officers. Is that right?
I don't, well, what he might be referring to is that I think either implicitly or explicitly it was agreed that there would be a very similar phone call on Thursday, and that essentially, again, by implication, there would be tabs kept with sufficient frequency to be able to react if the situation appeared to have changed.
Right.
And I was entirely in accord and welcomed that.
And how would the peer support be given if it was offered? Did you understand at the time?
Well, I think the phone call and, as it were, the searching conversation taking place on that phone call would probably tell Eleanor and John whether there was a problem that required me to be persuaded to invoke London Gold.
What peer support was provided to you, if any, during the period between this call at 5:30 on the evening of the 14th and the activation of the Gold Resolution on the 16th of June?
Well, first of all, I would say that the London Gold was activated on the evening of the 15th of June.
All right.
But another matter. I think that what I could have done, and I'm sure what I should have done, is what I did do the following week, which was to invite an experienced local authority chief executive colleague to come and, as it were, be in the room at all times and help me to do the role that I was then assigned to do. And Barry Quirk, who of course took over from me, turned up on, I think, either the Monday or the Tuesday of the following week. I could have done such a thing the previous week, and that would have probably helped.
And the second limb of support relates to what I think is called the after-call note, which was that Mark Sawyer would liaise with RBKC to detail the support and provide initial support on structures, needs and experience of previous events. Were those discussed afterwards?
Well, it says he would discuss with RBKC tomorrow morning.
Yeah, did he?
And yes, he came to the council, and I wouldn't be able to recount individual conversations to you, but he was invaluable on the Thursday.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment?
Yes, I think it is. Thank you very much. Well, Mr. Holgate, it's time we all had a break, get some lunch. So we'll stop there. We'll resume, please, at 2:00. And as before, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence when you're out of the room.
Certainly.
All right. Thank you very much. Would you care to go to the usher, please? Thank you very much, Mr. Millett. 2 o'clock, please.